I don't believe there's a human being on Earth who doesn't experience periods of depression, times when, as far as he's concerned, the whole world can close up shop and go fishing. The experts say these periods of feeling low, unhappy, and depressed are a normal part of living, provided we don't go too low when we're depressed or too high at the happy end of the cycle. If your periods of depression are too deep or last too long, you could probably use some professional help. But we all experience these highs and lows, and I've been in a real beauty of a low for the past day or so. Incidentally, these periods of depression almost always follow an illness, even a slight cold. Well, last Sunday morning, I was awakened by the telephone at 5 o'clock in the morning. It was a man I'd known years before who happened to be passing through town and just wanted to call and say hello. At 5 on a Sunday morning, he wanted to call and say hello. But once I'm up for good, so I went to the kitchen to make a pot of coffee. The moment that telephone rang, I was aware that I was depressed. In fact, the telephone had also awakened my wife, who took one look at me and asked me what was wrong. I told her I was feeling a little depressed, and she gave me a very cheering message. If I remember correctly, she said, "Oh, really?" She always has one of those great morale boosters right at the tip of her tongue. But as I was making the coffee, I thought that even though I felt low enough to crawl under the door, I couldn't think of a single human being on Earth with whom I'd trade places. And this seemed to have a good effect. And I began to wonder if this is true of everyone. Would anyone agree to physically change places with another person, to forget completely his own life and past, family and friends, to lose completely his own personality, his own mind and abilities, and take on those of another human being, a stranger? Would an old man sitting in the park willingly change places with the child being pushed by in a stroller? Would any woman, regardless of her present life, change places with any other woman on Earth? What do you think? Would you? Can you think of a person alive today with whom you'd willingly trade places? I mentioned this to my wife. I asked her the same question, and she said, certainly not. She said no one would, because it would mean losing one's identity, and that a person's identity is his most important possession. Now, to me, this was all very interesting, and I must admit that it went a long way toward restoring my attitude toward myself and the world. And the psychologists agree with my wife. They say that the most important thing to a human being is his identity as a person, and that's the thing he wouldn't trade. Bring the subject of trading places with someone else up the next time the family sits down at a meal. Give it some thought on your own. It has a way of getting us back on course. How about it? Is there anyone you'd trade with? Harvey Mindus, a practicing psychologist and a professor at UCLA, is the author of this marvelous book, Laughter and Liberation, in which he points out that everyone seems to realize the importance of a sense of humor and agrees that it's one of our most valuable faculties. Thinkers, simple and profound, declare that the ability to see the funny side of things and to laugh at ourselves and our troubles is an asset of the greatest magnitude. It can help us contend with adversity, derive greater joy from living, and maintain our sanity. Yet no one seems to know how to cultivate it. The kind of humor that deserves to be called therapeutic is not the kind that enjoys jokes and comic routines, for delightful as they may be, they're contrived and superficial, bearing about the same relation to therapeutic humor as pretty pictures do to art. The kind of sense of humor that can help us maintain our sanity moves beyond jokes, beyond wit, beyond laughter itself. It must constitute a frame of mind, a point of view, a deep, reaching attitude toward life. A cluster of qualities characterizes this peculiar frame of mind: flexibility, in this case, a person's willingness to examine every side of every issue and every side of every side; spontaneity, his ability to leap from one mood or mode of thought to another; unconventionality, his freedom from the values of his time, his place, and his profession; shrewdness, his refusal to believe that anyone, least of all himself, is what he seems to be; playfulness, his grasp of life as a game, a tragicomic game that nobody wins, but that does not have to be one to be enjoyed; and humility, that elusive quality exemplified by the rabbi in this traditional story. A wise old rabbi lay dying, so his disciples lined up next to his deathbed to catch his final words. They arranged themselves in order from the most brilliant pupil to the most obtuse. The brilliant one bent over the prostrate form and whispered, "Rabbi, what are your final words?" My final words, murmured the ancient rabbi, are, life is a river. Well, the disciple passed it on to the person next to him, and the phrase traveled like wildfire down the line. When it reached the oaf at the end, however, he scratched his head in perplexity. What does the rabbi mean, life is a river, he asked. Well, that question, of course, traveled back up the line. What does the rabbi mean, life is a river? When the star pupil heard it, he leaned over again. Rabbi, he implored, for the old man was breathing his last. What do you mean, life is a river? And the rabbi, shrugging, croaked, so it's not a river. A man who can shrug off the insufficiency of his ultimate wisdom, the meaninglessness of his profoundest thoughts, is a man in touch with the very soul of humor, and each of the 6 qualities contributing to it. The 6 qualities are the kind of sense of humor each of us needs: flexibility, willingness to see every side of an issue, spontaneity, unconventionality, shrewdness, playfulness, and humility. Maybe you saw the news item some time back about a Canadian farmer who sold his Stradivarius violin for, I think it was in the neighborhood of $60,000. He sold it to the same New York City dealer he had bought it from many years before. The dealer paid him more for it than he had paid, and that's because, of course, the violin had appreciated in value over the years and because of the shrinking buying power of the dollar. But the farmer sold his precious violin by the world's most famous violin craftsman because, as he put it, I'm getting old and I have no children to leave it to. And by getting it back in the hands of the dealer, he knew that it would wind up with someone who would treasure it as he had. Antonio Stradivari, the Italian violin maker, lived from 1644 to 1737. That's 93 years at a time when the average lifespan was about 30. He worked alone, although later in his life his sons helped him. No committee advised him. No one made decisions for him. His tools were primitive, but that was not important. He put himself into his work. All the world's tools couldn't make up for that. When he was finished with an instrument, when he was sure that his work measured up to his own personal standards, he signed his name to it. And today, more than 200 years later, his name is a household word all over the world. Everybody's heard of Stradivarius, the Latin form of the name that he inscribed on his violins. Throughout history, there have always been men with similar standards of excellence. Authors such as William Shakespeare, artists like Leonardo da Vinci, craftsmen like furniture maker Thomas Chippendale, and silversmith Paul Revere. Everything they did was done well, not because it had to be, but because they wanted it to be. They had only to please themselves, yet the products of their fertile minds and skillful hands are still collected and admired today. What is it that causes one person to take pride in what he does, while others give little or no thought to the quality of their work at all, do you know? Of course, when we talk about Stradivari or Da Vinci, we're talking about great geniuses, towering talents who found their media and became great in them. There have been many other fine violin makers and artists who took just as much pride and care in their work, but lacked the same quality of talent. There are even today many thousands of craftsmen who will not turn out shoddy work and who are proud to sign their names to their creations. They're in the minority, perhaps. They've always been in the minority. But the respect for quality never changes. It still commands the highest price. It's still revered wherever we find it. And the person creating it has gained for himself 2 precious assets. First, he's built the kind of security that lasts a lifetime. He need never worry about his income. And second, his work is a source of satisfaction and joy to him. He derives deep satisfaction from being an uncommon person. People who set their own high standards to which they make themselves measure up lead enjoyable, exciting lives. Each task they begin is a fascinating contest to achieve their own standards of excellence. A father sat down for a chat with his 16-year-old son. The father's a good friend of mine and an excellent salesman, so he had a pad of paper and a pen with him, because it's always better if you can illustrate your point while you're making it. And while his son watched with interest, Jim drew a fairly good likeness of a goose. And behind the goose, he drew 3 eggs. He said to his son, "Now, Jimmy, those are golden eggs. And that's the goose that lays the golden eggs. Now, if you had your choice of buying one or the other, which would you buy?" And his son said, "Well, I'd buy the goose, of course." "Of course you'd buy the goose," his father said. "You'd invest your money in the goose because it could go on laying those golden eggs for years." "Sure," his son said, "anyone would." "Yes," Jim went on, "anyone would if they were presented it in this way. But The fact of the matter is, son, that most people have the exact opportunity, and yet they invest in eggs instead of the goose. Now the boy was quite interested, and he asked his father what he meant, and his father said, in this little quiz I've given you, the goose and the golden eggs are, of course, symbolic. The golden eggs people invest in are represented by their homes, cars, television sets, furniture, refrigerators, stoves, boats, vacations, all the good things they can buy. All the good things everyone wants to have and should have. Well, what's wrong with that, the boy asked. Well, there's nothing wrong with that, Jimmy. It's just that most of them invest in golden eggs exclusively and don't invest enough in the goose that provides all these golden eggs. You see, the goose that lays the golden eggs is the breadwinner. The more money invested in him, the more golden eggs he can provide. Take you, for example, Jimmy, he said. You're 16, and like most boys your age, you don't know what you want to do with your life yet. You're confused. You haven't really been giving your best to your schoolwork because you're not sure you'll need a lot of the subjects you're studying after you get out of school. And not knowing what to do after you're an adult, you don't know what you'd want to major in at college. Now, what I want you to understand is that as long as you're getting an education, we're both investing in this goose. The more we invest here, the more golden eggs you'll be able to provide for yourself and your family someday. And if you're really smart, you'll never stop investing in the goose, even after college. Each year, you'll invest a percentage of your income in your continuing education. And each year, you'll find, that you're becoming more valuable as a person, able to provide still more and more of these golden eggs you and your family will want. Do you understand that, Jimmy? The boy was silent a long time, and he said, Yes, I think I do, Dad. I think I do. After my friend had his little illustrated talk with his son, as he told me later, the boy looked at the illustration a long time, then he picked it up, folded it, put it in his pocket, and went off to do his homework. How to become hated. How you can stir up resentments and ill will that will simmer and hang on for years. All you have to do is criticize. No matter what a person has done or how he lives his life, he doesn't want nor does he feel he needs criticism. This is why a criminal can fly into a rage against witnesses, prosecuting attorneys, and judges. Although he may have committed the most serious crime and knows full well that he's committed it, he deeply resents those who by their actions are critical of him. The unfaithful husband or wife will, as often as not, fly into wounded self-pitying rage when confronted with evidence of his or her infidelity. Now, I'm not saying that people should not be criticized for criminal or moral misconduct, but I am saying that criticism makes a person try to justify himself. It wounds his precious pride, hurts his sense of importance, and thoroughly abuses and arouses his resentment against the person or persons doing the criticizing. When we criticize another person, we set ourselves above him. We become the figure of authority and place the other person in an inferior position. He automatically, he doesn't like us. We put the other person on the defensive, and even if he doesn't say anything and accepts the criticism meekly, it rankles. When the husband at the bridge table says to his wife, "Well, my dear, you bid that hand like a certified moron," she might not say anything. She might not say anything at the moment, that is, but she'll secretly pray for a miracle that would deliver a sawed-off shotgun into her hands. The other players squirm in embarrassment, and what does it accomplish? As Junius wrote, it behooves the minor critic who hunts for blemishes to be a little distrustful of his own sagacity. The best rule to use when criticism springs to your mind is to wait. Wait a while, and try to look for the reasons behind the act you would criticize. It's also a good time to ask oneself, who am I to be criticizing others? Am I really all that great and pure and all-knowing and perfect? By all means, wait until the heat of anger is dissipated. This is one of the world's most difficult things to do, and it takes a very mature person to master the wisdom and self-control to withhold criticism. But it's the way to greatness, and one of the best-known ways to earn the respect and or love of others. People know when they've done something wrong or foolish, and they usually know that you know it too. And when you refrain from being critical, they're grateful. They respect you. Often as not, they'll be much tougher on themselves and make a concerted effort to avoid making the same mistake again. It's been said that the legitimate aim of criticism is to direct attention to the excellent. The bad will dig its own grave, and the imperfect may safely be left to that final neglect from which no amount of present undeserved popularity can rescue it. It's a good line to remember. As old Epictetus put it, Do not give sentence in another's tribunal until you have been yourself judged in the tribunal of justice. The key to overcoming the urge to criticize others is to wait. Wait a minute, or an hour, or a day, or forever.